So we are happy to have everyone here with us today. We look forward to engaging with you around this very important topic in our work that Nicole and I are in the trenches doing every day with districts and teachers and leaders, and answering questions around scaffolds and supports in the Tier 1 setting, including considering how to identify the appropriate scaffolds that allow for equal access to excellent Tier 1 instruction for all learners. So we are excited to be with you today and jump into this topic and have some good discussions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sure if during the first session you saw this disclaimer, I think 3 times, and I don't think it's changed between the first session and now. So I think we're probably pretty solid with the generative AI tools and the ask from the department to not use those during this type of presentation and learning. We are all very excited to have you join us today, and really to the opportunity to learn from and with all of you. So our norms for today are specifically designed just to create an environment where we can do just that, all learn from and with one another, and to show up as our best selves in this opportunity. We ask that you elevate any clarifying questions that might come up. And like Lori said, hopefully you're able to keep those cameras on while we're together. And as always, please keep that open mindset, that growth mindset throughout. And again, if possible, monitoring that outside tech use to honor the learning and contribution of your peers throughout this time. That is truly a gift that we've been given to all be together.
Okay, our agenda for the next hour is outlined for you here. Please read the agenda items to yourself, and in the chat, we'd love for you to, a lot of you have already put your name and what institution that you represent today. If you haven't done that, you can put that in there too. But we'd also like to hear which of these agenda items most pique your interest. Is it the independence and ownership that scaffolds can create for students, the shifts required to attain that ownership of learning, or maybe it's the scaffolds as part of the lesson prep process? So I'd love to just kind of see where you're interested in jumping in today. Okay. All right, I'm seeing some lesson prep and some
beautiful
scaffolds. Yep. Great. So hopefully you will be able to take something away from today and from us, or as you have the opportunity to connect with colleagues across the state. All right, we can move on to the next.
That scaffolding to independence and ownership, that's of this material, that's probably the part that gets me the most excited.
All right. Okay, so you see our objectives here today. And thank you for letting us know what you're excited to learn more about today. Our objectives are listed on the screen. We've got some keywords bolded for you here. We are seeking to leverage student assets in service of identifying the most appropriate, targeted, and temporary scaffolds and the role that process plays in intellectual prep. So that's where we're going to spend our time today.
Yep, targeted and temporary. Melissa, those might be the words of the day, right?
Yep.
Okay, so to break the ice just a little bit and to hopefully encourage you guys to keep participating throughout this time with us, I would like for you let's switch it up a bit. Let's move it away from the chat to a conversation, a little bit of a conversation. Please, when you've had a moment to independently consider the question, we invite you to come off mute. And share with us how scaffolds are currently being considered as part of lesson prep and practice with your candidates. So this is definitely one of those opportunities where we get to learn from you. We get to hear from you. And yeah, when you've had a second, to think about that question. How are scaffolds currently considered as part of lesson prep and practice with your candidates?
Hi,
Mhm.
I'm Rachel from
Hi.
Belmont. We really have that focus along UDL for universal design. So I think our students are really going into the lesson already looking at ways they can, consider it being how they can make it multi-sensory, but then also really beginning to consider different needs of their students. So we really have our students explore the context of their learning environment. Who are their students and what are those needs? But then they also just look at that whole lesson
So
prep
our
process.
next topic of discussion is.
Thank
Sorry.
you. No.
Okay. I don't know
Thank
if that was
you.
what you were looking for, but that's where I went.
Oh, no, that is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Rachel from Belmont. Also, it's very nice to meet you. Anyone else? I saw several, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I did see several LMU people introduce themselves in the chat. Can I hear from someone from LMU in response to this?
Yeah, I don't care to go. I'm Andrea from LMU. One of the things that I'm really working with in my intro level courses is just the scaffolds that have to do with modeling, because it's never too soon in the actual activities and instructions portion of lesson design and lesson prep to make sure that they understand just how critical that modeling is. And so we've talked about it with everything from modeling that vocabulary in the multiple tiers of vocabulary all the way to just making sure that they understand that in some points it goes way beyond the I do, we do, you do into, it breaks down a lot more than that. And so really trying as an instructor to model that to them and then to teach them to use that in application as modeling.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And it's great to hear how you're already using. Yes, Renee, would you like to share?
Sure. So I actually have a protocol where we take a whole unit and we look at what all standards are covered within that. Really, it's more like a week unit to see how frequently throughout the week the standards are being implemented, and actually look at beyond the IU we do you do is the independent work. How many times did students have the opportunity to work on the skills that they were provided throughout the week? And we've actually found that a lot of the high quality instructional materials do not include enough independent practice. So that's where we focus our learning, is where you might, as an interventionist, need to have some more independent practice for those students who are struggling.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Renee. But all three of you, Rachel and Andrea and Renee, thank you guys for engaging in that. Now you've set the standard, so now lots of opportunities. As we launch our time together, it is important to ground ourselves in those celebrations, and that is going to be a big piece of what we talk about today, is celebrating and recognizing those opportunities with specifically through a very asset-based lens. And this is something we want to model throughout all of our work and all of our leadership. And when we think about our pre-service educators and our candidates, your candidates, we want to start with a focus on those strengths. Same for our K-12 kiddos. Melissa, I know you can attest to the fact that that our director is fantastic at reminding us we are focused on progress, not perfection. We want to see that growth in motion, right? We want to stack those small wins. So throughout our time together today, we are going to be thinking about how we can have that asset-based mindset and leverage strengths that exist within our learners.
Yep, I've got the sticker on my computer. Remind me every day. So let's begin by outlining the purpose of scaffolding. And thinking about scaffolding in service of driving toward independence and ownership. We found that this conversation has shifted the lens for many of our educators in the field as we've begun kind of talking about this, and it's generating some really great dialogue. Scaffolds are put in place to increase student ownership of the task, not to complete the scaffold itself, which that in and of itself is a bit of a shift to think about, like where are we really, what is our end goal, and keeping that, helping for us to keep that grounded. But our goal is to engage into, we want the students to be able to engage independently with grade level texts and tasks. And so some shifts there that we're gonna kind of consider today. Again, just some minor shifts and maybe a little tweak in the way that we're thinking about it has really, again, generated some really great discussions and dialogue across all the districts that we've been serving in these conversations in the last few months.
So again, we'll invite you to come off mute in just a moment. What do you notice about the design of the supports for each of the children in these two pictures? When you're ready, please come off mute, share your noticings just around the supports each child is receiving in the pictures on the slide. Okay, thank you, Mandy. Yes, they're.
When I look at that second picture, I immediately see that that child is able to do independent work, that her supports are allowing her to completely be independent.
Thank you. Oh, Cindy in the chat, designed to provide access. Uh-oh, I couldn't read it quite fast enough.
To what's there and not change the work to be done. I think that's a good call out right there.
Yes.
We're not changing what she's attempting to do, but we're providing the access for her to be able to do that.
Thank you guys for engaging in that.
Okay, so what makes scaffolds successful? That's where we're gonna kind of think about that. So think of a time when you or a teacher that you observed implemented a scaffold that enabled a student to independently access grade level text and the task. And think about what made that successful. So just think about that. You can jot down your ideas. You've got your note catcher there. So think about what made it successful. So you can say, yep, that was a good one, but what made it successful? So if we think about the most effective scaffolds, we can identify 3 characteristics that likely stand out across all. Effective scaffolding is anchored in contingency. It's fading, and it actively works to transfer the responsibility to the learner. So when we say contingency, we mean that the support offered by the scaffold is targeted support, and it's based on that student's current learning ability and needs. So it's very targeted. Nicole mentioned that was going to be one of our words for today's. How do we become more targeted and intentional? And this type of scaffold, an effective scaffold, requires support that's fading. So we want to think about what is fading. That's referring to the intentional withdrawal of assistance as the student proficiency increases. It's not, we don't want to keep scaffolds in place as the student becomes more proficient and working towards independence. And we want to think about what's the off ramp? So this is what we talk about. What's the off? There has to be a plan for an off ramp. It's there and it's going to be there forever. So we want to always keep that in mind. And that's when, as we do that, if we're targeted and we have the fading plan, the off ramp, we're transferring that, we get to the transfer of responsibility. That's when that can occur, when the learner can independently complete the task. And this is ultimately our end goal. So we got to keep that in mind. Our end goal is to get them to be to independence. Effective scaffolding is strategic. It's intentional. The teacher determines exactly when support's needed, what tools to use, and the precise moment that they need to step back and let the learner proceed independently. So if we go back to that picture, we think about those 3 things. Nicole, if we'll go to the next slide.
Did it shift to the next one, to the pictures again?
I'm still seeing the others. Are you guys seeing the? There we go. Okay. All right. So to stamp that the learning or thinking about those three components, it's worth kind of coming back to this visual and thinking about those three things through this lens. You kind of already called out a few of these, or kind of thinking through this. So when we view this through the lens of contingency, fading, and transfer of responsibility, our noticings of the supports received of each child might reveal more. And so if we think about these two kiddos trying to complete a task through the lens of contingency, think about, is the support exactly the right support at the right time based on the specific strengths and needs of each child in their particular task? When we think about fading, can you envision how the current supports that they have will fade as they work toward taking ownership of their task and become more independent? There may still need to be some that stay in place, but there may also be some that can be pulled back. And what does that transfer of responsibility look like? So consider the alternative for these kids. Maybe we don't have a plan to work toward independence. We might have the best intentions, we always do, I believe, to help, but we can help too much. And we want to think about, what does that take away from the kids when we help too much? We might also provide support, but we might not provide the right support for this child in this particular task. So either way, we miss a great opportunity to support a child to develop agency.
So to expand on successful scaffolds, they are about ensuring that all students have access to grade level skills found within a lesson. Those successful scaffolds intentionally address the prerequisite skills that are necessary. They are determined, just like Melissa elevated for us, they're determined based on student assets and supports needed based on recent and relevant data. The images we just viewed in the previous slides are such powerful examples of exactly that, right? They're based on student assets and most recent and relevant data. Also, temporary, that went with our targeted, right? Temporary, and the student maintained ownership of the task. And that's why those two visuals were so powerful the first time we engaged with this content. So the shift to considering assets, in addition to all of those opportunities to grow our learners, required that I make a very intentional shift in my own thinking. The asset-based way of thinking in order to identify the appropriate scaffold to leverage in student learning was a significant shift for me personally. I'm being fully transparent and absolutely vulnerable here with 60 of my newest and closest friends, all of you. I learned a lot about myself and my own cognitive processes throughout just throughout the exploration of appropriate scaffolding. My instinct as an educator was always to identify first what my student could not do, every time, without fail. That was where I immediately went. And then I would find the scaffold that bridged that gap. So making that shift to an asset-based mindset, and instead of only considering the gaps and what my kiddos could not do, making that shift to considering everything that my student can already do really well that's related to this new skill, that was a breakthrough for me. So I get super excited when we dig into that aspect of scaffolding, and truly approach it as the new skill that it is for some of us.
just the gaps. So we're looking, that's where maybe a lot of us tend to go first because we see the thing that they can't do, and then we immediately go to try to fix the thing. If we do that, though, we are very likely going to miss the mark because we're not truly understanding what support's going to be the best support for that student if we leave that part out. So understanding how to leverage their student assets is the big shift in the approach to how learners are supported. So we have to think about how might we strengthen this skill and shift our thinking to this approach, because it is something that I think even as we work and others are having this conversation, just first is recognizing that it's there, the awareness piece, and then what do you do to shift your habits of thinking in order to come at this from a different angle that might get you a more targeted scaffold than what we maybe had done in the past. So we often start with thinking about what the students cannot do. And this is the mindset change that can be difficult for teachers because a lot of times they're often looking for mastery versus growth towards mastery. And so it's not, you get to the end and they either got it or they didn't get it, but we're looking at, they may not have gotten all of it, but which parts did they get? What did they do well? And thinking about, okay, now how do we build on that to work toward mastery? So a small tweak, but can be, I think, has the potential to be really powerful. So how can we begin to support pre-service educators or the work that you're currently doing and building on that and having these conversations to look at individual student strengths that can be leveraged to grow the student skills and knowledge? So in order to prepare successful scaffolds, we need to start by setting up teachers to have the mindset first that are focused on student strengths, and then also have that belief, like really have the belief, because we say it a lot, but we really have to have the belief at our core that with the right scaffolds, all students can independently be successful. And we have to be really honest with what is our current belief and where are we in that, and how can we ensure that we're all on the same page there.
So again, Melissa reminded us just a minute ago, you do have your note catcher that you can use to kind of record your reflections here. And if you are comfortable also dropping a note or two in the chat in response to these reflection questions, I know we've kind of talked for a while, but how might this framing enhance and influence maybe the way your candidates consider students when identifying appropriate scaffolds? Do you agree that asset-based mindset when considering scaffolds during lesson prep, is that a significant shift? And another opportunity for us to learn from you in your role. What steps are you currently taking, or might you consider taking to foster that asset-based mindset among your candidates? We would love to hear about that as well. Melissa, I think we saw, there we are in the, let's see if I can get to the chat. Growth-oriented mistakes and struggles are seen as data, not failures. Oh, I might steal that one. Harvest, not steal, sorry. I will harvest it for future convenings. Added in a prompt to our lesson prep. Katie, would you mind coming off, are you where you can come off mute and tell us a little bit more about the prompt that's been added to the lesson prep template?
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking for the actual prompt, but I don't have it right here. So I was gonna try to find it. Let me try to find what the actual prompt is and I'll put it in
Okay.
there.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's huge. It's already been, they have a prompt added in their lesson prep protocol that asks their candidates to do that exact thing, to leverage student assets when considering.
I love that, having those honest conversations about those bias that we may or may not, have, or those underlying things that inform how we make decisions every day.
That's right. That's right. And we're already considering what happens when educators approach supporting students by thinking about just the needs, which is actually only focusing in on student deficits. But in the pursuit to ensure that all kids are achieving, educators often fixate, on what needs to be taught and not what is already there. I'm probably talking to myself as much as anybody else. How does this impact our educators in the classroom when they only have a what are the needs mindset versus assessing for those assets? Quick example. We have a student, Liam, and he is 3 years below grade level in reading with a language processing disorder. If the educators only focused on his inability to read grade level text, then they may throw at him lots of decoding, direct instruction, or lower level text for him to spend his time reading. However, those supports they may find are not having the impact because our team failed to recognize he has great spatial awareness. And through visual expression, Liam demonstrates complex comprehension and understanding. So when the team uses and shifts to that asset-based lens, they identify his strengths of showing his comprehension. And therefore, they focus their discussion on identifying in prep, they focus their discussion on identifying a scaffold that's going to leverage his assets and meet his targeted need. We can quickly see how the wrong scaffolds could be identified for students when that asset-based thinking isn't strong or hasn't quite been developed yet.
Okay, so as we think about how we're going to transform teaching, we must also transform the way that we use scaffolds. We can shift from scaffolds being overused in general to a transformative teaching practice that can increase learning outcomes. So as we dive into this way of thinking about scaffolding, let's consider, how does this approach to identifying scaffolds improve the effectiveness of determining the right scaffold for that particular student? So we've talked about what makes a scaffold successful. We want to spend some time thinking about providing the right scaffold at the right time. And we want to consider scaffolds that are anchored in those 3 things we mentioned earlier: contingency, fading, and transfer of responsibility. And there are some tried and true strategies that you probably see often as they're considering providing scaffolds to meet the needs of their students. And these all have the potential to be effective supports. However, those same scaffolds can also fall short if they're not used to support the right thing. So you could have a scaffold that can support some students with a particular thing, but if you're not looking at that targeted intentionality, strategic scaffold matching to that student, what their strengths are, because you may be providing a scaffold around something that is lying in their strength, and the scaffold is not going to support the thing that they need. So we want to consider how we can move to providing tailored scaffold supports. And to do that, we have to understand the root cause. And so what exactly about the student's thinking is getting in the way of them being independently successful? And this means understanding what they can do. If we provide a scaffold, even one that can be a good scaffold, that supports the wrong thinking, it won't be effective. If everyone gets the same good scaffold, right? It might support some of the students really well and completely miss the mark for others. So the trick is matching the right scaffold to support the right thinking need. And so we're going to think about these 3 different approaches to scaffolding. So a cognitive scaffold. That's going to help break down those abstract concepts and make new and complex content accessible. So that's the area that they need support in. An example of that might be providing visuals for new vocabulary, complex vocabulary around a new concept. And so if that's where their need lies, then that's the scaffold that you match to that. It could be a metacognitive scaffolding that's needed. These are going to cultivate the skills necessary for self-regulation and independent learning. And so an example of this that I saw in a classroom recently, a student with autism did not have a cognitive deficit struggle. So that was not their struggle. Their struggle was with self-regulation. And so I don't want to give them a cognitive scaffold because that is, if we think about asset space, that is their asset. What their struggle is with self-regulation. So the teacher knowing this, provided the student with a checklist, which led to the student to be more independent and successful in completing that task. So she was able to match the appropriate scaffold that was addressing the specific thinking, the need that they had, and acknowledging that it wasn't a cognitive deficit, right? That was actually an asset. And we target specifically the thing that was kind of getting in the way. The third is a procedural scaffold. So these are the scaffolds that keep learners focused, reduce cognitive overload, and they build independence. So an example of this that I saw, a student was writing an essay. They were asked to write. They were able to write a good intro paragraph about right away, complete sentences, had the different points that he wanted to write about. He had, again, complete sentences, spelling was good, thoughts were there, right? He had all the beginnings of that. He got started and he got to that point and he just didn't know where to go from there. So he just wasn't able to move on to complete the rest of the essay. So he had the thoughts, he's got, he's able to put those down on paper. He's got some organization, but he just kind of got stuck. And so he sat there. And so this is where we didn't have the right scaffold for this student. So he just sat because he didn't know what to do next. So he would have benefited from a support that helped guide him through that process. And so we're going to think about those 3: contingency, fading, and transfer responsibility, and then also these 3 different ways of thinking about scaffolding and how, again, where are their strengths so that we don't address the wrong thing, and where are their needs so that we can target the right, just the right scaffold at the right time.
Again, revisiting some of our established scaffold basics. We discussed what makes a scaffold successful. Now we're moving into a way of thinking more deeply and considering how to choose the right scaffold for each student. And when thinking about the purpose of a scaffold, scaffolds are tools for transformative teaching. The goal is always better student outcomes, especially reaching grade level success independently. Tailor those scaffolds. Scaffolds are to be customized to meet the student need, not one size fits all. And tailored scaffolds are just much more efficient. There are keyword targeted, and they lead to that faster student progress. Scaffolding, yes, it's a resource, but it's a resource that should fade gradually. It's focused on every student gaining access to grade level text and task. And again, just like Melissa stamped for us earlier, the goal is not to do that scaffold well. The goal isn't to complete the graphic organizer. The goal is for the student to master the grade level content and become much more independent learners. And sometimes for me, it helps. This slide was perfect for this. For me, it helps to understand more what a tailored scaffold is when I put it right next to what it is not. So you'll see on the left-hand side, just a very clear description of those generic scaffolds. And one example it lists is that one size fits all approach to scaffolding. And we see many pitfalls. when we use that generic scaffold approach. For one, we run the risk of deviating from exactly what Melissa told us our scaffold should be. They should be about contingency. They should be fading and that transfer of ownership. Just such essential parts to those targeted and tailored scaffolds. Melissa, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, so we have a tool that we created that that is out in districts, and I'm kind of looking at and playing around with to support this. And so I want to just say first, the purpose of the tool is this is not the end all be all. It is not everything in every scenario. It is just a starting point, a jumping off point to kind of to help maybe frame the conversation a little differently and to think about how you can leverage these three different types of scaffolds. And with that asset-based mindset, pulling all those things together. So it's just a start to help us to begin to think about the type of thinking students need support with and matching that with the most appropriate scaffold. We're going to give you a minute, time in just a few minutes to kind of play around with this. I just want to call out that the tool is organized by the three types of scaffolds that we went through earlier, the approaches that we discussed. You'll notice that they're example scaffolds that might support each approach, when you might use it and what it might look like. Again, I'm saying might, right? Because this is just the starting point. You can also notice under the when to use it column, most of those statements, and I think even some, as I look at these, maybe could be, we could modify them a little bit. Almost all of them, you'll notice that each statement has two parts. And this is the way that we're wanting to shift the thinking and the conversation and how we talk about this. But we can see what the student can do and then followed by what they need help with. So we always start with what is it that we notice they can do, and then where do we go from there? So some examples that you'll see on this this tool, a student has grade level organization and concept development, and they need support with spelling. And so you have to think about, okay, what can they do? And I don't want to provide a scaffold to support that because they can do that, but I need to give them something that's going to support them with spelling. Another student has lots of ideas. They've got the thinking, but they need support with time management and focus. So we want, and this is in the materials. Yes. That, yeah.
Lori, will you just clarify very quickly where they can find the link to this resource?
Yes, I was typing, but not quick enough. So all the resources that are going to be shared are in two places. They're on the convening link and on the note catcher link, but I'll also drop those in the chat as well so that they're accessible. So let me just go ahead and I'm just going to throw them all in there.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you for doing that.
So if we think about, so we've got one student who has lots of ideas. We've got one, but needs support with time management and focus. And then maybe another student doing the same task has lots of ideas, right? So their strengths are the same, but his needs are that he needs support getting started or expanding their ideas. And so if we think about just taking these three different scenarios, if you've got these three kids sitting in your classroom, and you likely do, have this scenario happening, these students do need different supports to complete the same task. And if we give all students a sentence starter, for example, because we see that's one that we see a lot, right? If I give all the students a sentence starter, it might help one of the students, but it won't address the needs of the others. And so we've got to get away from what Nicole was talking about, kind of a generic one size fits all. I've got a good scaffold. And again, sometimes it is appropriate and it does help. But if we look at specifically where those students, what they can do and what they need support with, that's not going to meet that scaffold is not going to be the appropriate one for them. So this approach can help us shift from that generic scaffold to more tailored scaffolds if we think about it in that way.
And Melissa, you did a much better job of explaining the cognitive, metacognitive, and the procedural scaffolds that are there in that resource for us. I didn't do a great job of clicking through that slide in the way that it is animated to show how the scaffolds are organized in this resource.
Yeah, so you'll see all three of those, and under each of those, you'll see different scaffolds that might address that type of thinking need, some different scenarios of potential, scenarios with kids, and then when you would potentially, what that might look like.
So if it will, there we go. Okay. We're going to give you some time with your peers. We're going to send you into breakout rooms in just a moment. So if you can come back on to camera, and of course you'll come off mute when you get into your breakout rooms. We want to give you the time to look at how the tool could support your candidates to identify those high leverage scaffolds that are going to support students in accessing grade level text and tasks in a targeted and temporary format, and through that very asset-based lens. So remember, it's key that scaffolds are provided only when necessary, that they are aligned with our current data. That's something that we've definitely talked about, and move students towards that independent practice that we are seeking. So again, the tool is organized into cognitive, metacognitive, and procedural scaffolds to support the transition to leveraging those tailored scaffolds, moving away from the more generic. And we're going to place you into breakout rooms and give you the opportunity to collaborate with your partners using this tool in practice. You also have links in your materials to student profiles. There's a learning task included, as well as access again to that high quality scaffolding tool. Please leverage that as you identify those key student assets when considering the full requirement of the task that students are being asked to complete. Using the scaffolding tool, collaborate with your partners to determine those high leverage scaffolds that will best support each student based on the information provided. Will that learner best benefit from a cognitive, metacognitive, or procedural scaffold? And when we come back together, we'll ask each group to share out conversations your team engaged in, and any scaffolding conclusions that you made based on those student assets. There are going to be 2 specific questions for reflections when you come back. First, we're going to ask how your team approached lesson prep differently when you incorporated that asset-based language and the high-quality scaffolding tool. And the second question we're going to ask is, how might this approach to lesson prep support your candidates' readiness for the classroom? So I'll be sure when you're in your breakout rooms to drop those questions in the chat so you can reference them. Also, when you get into your rooms, if you would maybe choose a reporter who will share out your group reflections when we return. Our plan was to stay in the room for 10 minutes. We may need to back that off to about 7 minutes to give us time to come back and share out. Yeah, it looks like everybody's making their way back.
Sorry, we know that wasn't a long time to discuss, but hopefully you got a little bit of time to connect. We all back? Okay, so we are, as per usual, an hour goes faster than sometimes we think. And so we are going to wrap this one up. We hope you had some good conversations in your breakout rooms and just got to play around with that tool a little bit and see how you might leverage that or pieces of that. And we want to just stay grounded. We want to come back to our focus on these 3 key components. We spent our time during the session looking at how 2 of these work together, but the synergy that all 3 levers provide is what will result in acceleration for all learners. So in the next session, for those of you who are joining that, you're going to dive more deeply into what student work analysis and lesson prep brings in this process. So thinking about how student work analysis that supports lesson prep and considering the assets-based mindset and the scaffolding and how all those things working together drastically improves our expertise for all students when identifying those tailored scaffolds. So really it's about pulling all these three together. And so in the next session, you'll kind of dive into that.
And I'm sorry, Melissa?
Oh, go ahead. We just, I guess we're at time, but we a couple minutes left. We would love to just hear you come off mute and as we close for this session, sharing your reflections using the prompt. What are you ready to do next as you consider all that you've talked about today? Okay, if you don't want to share those, jot those down for your independent thinking, thinking about your next steps and hopefully help ability to take all the things from all the sessions and pulling those together. We do thank you for allowing us to spend some time with you today as we talk about scaffolding. Again, these are conversations that are happening out in districts, and we're glad to have you as part of the conversation as well as you help support our future teachers.